Hello? Oh, there's an echo.
Oh, that might be me. I'll put my headphones on.
Oh, it's okay. No, it went away now. It went away.
Okay.
So happy Thursday. Nicole is here with me. We are combined virtually on Restream, which is very exciting. Herman is out fishing today. He went fishing for tuna. So fingers crossed we have fresh fish. I have not heard from them. But if you haven't met Nicole before, Nicole is a licensed judge and an FEI rider and a wonderful coach. So I'm excited to have her here so that we can talk a little bit about the training scale from the judge's perspective. So tell us, Nicole, when you're sitting there in the judge's booth, how does the training scale play into what you are looking at?
Thanks, Amelia. It's everything, to be very honest. You couldn't judge a dressage test without the training scale. It is the basis of all of the tests, all of the structure, all of our judging criteria. Everything that we do relates back to the training scale. It is so ingrained in the system. And so you really have to know the training scale in and out as a judge, or else you wouldn't be able, it would be like shooting arrows in the dark. It would be very, very difficult. So it's one thing that we're tested on quite a bit at our conferences and our clinics, and we're expected to know inside out, back of our hand. And yeah, it's very, very involved. So if you have any aspirations of being a judge, definitely got to know the training scale.
Yeah. And this week's theme has been all about the training scale. I can't believe that last Wednesday, we just started boot camp last Wednesday. This week has gone by really fast. So we did the boot camp, we did the training scale webinar, and Sunday is the last day to sign up for the training scale masterclass. So if you haven't joined yet, the link is above or below here. We've had a lot of students sign up already, which is wonderful and very exciting. It is my favorite course. And like Nicole said, I think the training scale is the foundation for all of your training. So when you have a problem with any movement, whether it's a flying change or a transition or a circle, anything that you're doing can be fixed by thinking about the training scale. And the training scale simplifies things. It gives you a structure. It gives you something to like go back and rely on. So it's super important that you have it in your head at all times whenever you're working with your horse so that you don't get emotional and upset about things. So let's see what else. Okay, so the purpose of the level. For those of you who show, when you look at your test sheet at the top corner, it always says the purpose of the level. And what does that mean, Nicole? Why is that important? How does the training scale play into that?
Yeah, so the purpose of the level is basically telling the rider the frame or balance expectations for this specific test. So essentially what happens is at intro and training level, we're just trying to establish the training scale, your rhythm and relaxation, a little bit of suppleness, but you don't really have connection, impulsion, straightness, or collection yet in those levels. And then as we go up, we start to add the different elements of the training scale, and then as we get higher into the levels, the requirements get greater and greater. And what that essentially means is that your horse's frame and balance, the roundness through their body, the ability to sit back and engage their hindquarters increases as they go up the levels. So, which is why from second level to fourth level, even though those purposes don't change very much, it keeps saying increasing engagement of the hindquarters, increasing this, increasing that, so that you can get more and more balance in your horse to do the more difficult movements. Does that answer that question, Amelia?
Yeah, no, that's helpful. And it's also, I think, let's use the leg yield as an example. So like if you're showing first level and you go up the center line and you ride a leg yield, what's important to understand is that the judge is looking at rhythm, suppleness, and connection, not just the leg yield, right?
Yes, exactly. We always, when we're scoring movements, we go back to the training scale, because that the essence of the training scale and the essence of what we're trying to do when we take our horses to Grand Prix is to make them more rideable and to make their gaits more harmonious and easier to sit. And so because they're essentially carrying themselves in better balance. So whenever we score a movement, we always work from the bottom up. So oftentimes in like the walk pirouettes, when you see stuck and things like that, oftentimes there's other things going wrong in the walk pirouettes, like the horse is above the bit or is bent the wrong way or something like that. Those are issues as well, but they're not as important as rhythm because rhythm is the base of the pirouette. Does that give you a good example to work with?
Yeah. And I think it's also important from a training perspective because often we get obsessed with a movement. Like we get obsessed with my leg yield. I can't ride a leg yield, or my canter transition isn't good, or I can't do a flying change. But the way that you solve that problem is by going back to the basics. So in the leg yield, for example, if I'm trying to teach my horse to do a leg yield, and it's not going well, the first thing I ask myself is what happened to the rhythm and the tempo? Did the horse slow down? Did the horse speed up? Did the quality of my trot go away? And so you solve problems by using the training scale, not just by repeating the same movement badly over and over again.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And I think it's also, we should talk a little bit about the quality of the gaits, because we had someone write in and ask, different breeds, how much consideration does the judge give to that? Is there just one standard about the quality of the gait? So can you talk a little bit about rhythm and gaits and how that scoring happens?
Yeah, for sure. So first off, dressage is for every horse and every rider. We do not care if you are on a little halflinger pony or a great big warm blood. We judge you exactly the same as you're across the board, whether you're a professional, not professional, pony, not pony. Everyone has a level playing field. And the gaits do have to be clear and even, and certain breeds of horses are naturally going to have a clearer 4-beat walk, a clearer trot, and a clearer canter. The drafty horses struggle with their canter, and so because of that, they're going to be more challenged in developing that. But the purpose of the training scale, going back to what we were saying earlier, was to make your horse more rideable and to have easier gaits to sit. So what happens is, if you're training your horse correctly up the levels, it doesn't matter what you start out with, because you'll actually improve the gaits as you develop your horse's way of going and as they get stronger in their back and their core and as they're able to sit back on their hindquarters. Some people are starting off with, a more pure raw material when you go and you import a really expensive, nice warm blood, but that doesn't mean that you're going to be at a huge advantage at the end of the day if the little hackney pony is able to develop their gaits equally as well.
Yeah.
So it really, really depends on the training and working with what you have. And the trot is the easiest. You would probably agree with this. The trot is the easiest gait to improve on, and then probably your canter, and then the walk. The walk is very, very hard to improve, but doesn't mean you can't improve it.
Yeah. But I love that. And that is what I love about dressage too, is to remember that the word dressage means training. And so it's all about taking the horse that you have, following a system and a framework, being consistent and persistent, because it is definitely hard, and then making the best out of your horse. And even a horse that maybe doesn't have the best natural canter quality or the fanciest trot, through the correct training and by following the training scale, you can improve your horse a lot. But it does take that consistency, and it takes really understanding the training scale. And that's part of what I love about the training scale masterclass, is really learning the theory of how do you improve your horse's canter, or how do you improve the trot, or how do you improve a movement, because it's more than just doing the same thing over and over again. And when you understand the theory and the system of training horses, it's such a crazy thing. I'll tell you a story, Nicole. So when I first moved to California, I always rode like young horses and baby horses and green horses. And so I rode this horse named Lavaro that my trainer Sue had in training. And I rode him and I was like, whatever. He's nice enough. He was like an ex-jumper. And I was like, whatever, he's fine. So I come back a year later. He'd been in training with Sue for a year. And I rode Lavaro again, and he was like a different horse. Like he trotted huge and his legs were flying all over the place, and he was like floating and he did flying changes. And I was like, wow, okay, this actually works. Like training actually works. Have you ever had an experience like that?
I've had a few, nothing as dramatic as that, but a few times where I've been just like chugging along with like training and I'm like, okay, this is, whatever. And then I kind of look back at footage and I'm like, wow, like this horse used to not be able to canter. Now they can canter, right? And things like that. But I wish I had an experience like that because that would be really special to get on and feel that difference and feel that change.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna do a fun little game now that we have people here watching. What I thought would be fun is if you can put in the chat a comment that you've gotten from a judge or from a trainer. So, what are like some of the common remarks that you've gotten? Do you want to give us some examples of ones that you like to write, Nicole?
I like to write one that you'll see oftentimes if I'm judging is needs more balance because it's a really good one for when, especially with the eventers when they're coming from their canter down to their trot and they slam on the brakes and the horse rushes into the trot. And if they had more balance and preparation before the canter, in the canter, the trot transition would be better. So that one is one I have been known to say a fair few times in that transition.
Okay, that's a nice comment. I was thinking more like hollow, stiff, tension, or what about, didn't you say you got a comment one, or I think I've gotten that's just a question mark in the
Yeah, I've
comment?
gotten that one before myself when riding. I try not to do that. They're really putting an emphasis on our education of making comments useful for the riders, specifically based on the levels and the shows that we're at. So if you're riding intro first, second, your comments are going to be much more structured in a sense that you can understand. Whereas in third, fourth, and FEI, we're kind of like the tests are going so fast. It's one word or two words a sentence, so it's impulsion or roundness. Whereas in the lower levels, it's going to be needs to be more over the back or needs to be more supple, and so that's ways that people can understand and under a little bit more rather than just a question mark and not really knowing what part of the training scale are we losing out on here. How do we make our I think that's one of the biggest things that they push on, and I know it's a struggle for every judge, is how do we make our comments accurate, fair, useful, and kind. Because we try and hit all those points, but it's very hard.
Yeah.
I see a comment in from Naomi. A comment I get lots is need to go more forward. Yes, that is definitely one. And forward, feeling rhythm in front of the leg. Amelia, do you want to talk a little bit about how you can train that? Because that's definitely something we see a lot in the lower levels, or even in the upper levels when they're losing steam in the lateral work.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I guess it begs the question of what is forward? So, from the judge's view, what is forward? And then I'll tell you from the rider's view what I feel like forward is.
Forward for me, and when I'm looking at it, is nothing changes in the tempo and speed, right? I'm not seeing things slow down in the lateral work or suck back. Lots of changes of tempo. It should be consistent. And it has to be forward thinking and with pace and ground cover, right? Because if you can have a tempo and a rhythm that's slow, but then nothing is really happening and the horse gets kind of stuck in their body. And in that case, you need more RPMs to make them a little bit more honest. Because also what happens if the tempo gets too slow, then the rhythm gets distorted quite often. And so for me, it needs to be, it depends also on the level. It's so hard to say as like a general spectrum, but a good tempo that with an even rhythm that isn't changing as they change movements or change gaits. And then quite often, oftentimes when I say needs more forward, it's because I can physically see the rider struggling. You're losing some harmony.
Okay. I agree with all those things. Definitely the rider. It's forward is a feeling. It's a feeling that your horse should be set on cruise control. You know, in your car, when you set it at 60 miles per hour, that's how your horse should be, just at that speed. And like Nicole mentioned, that your horse doesn't slow down when you go to turn or do a circle. That's really important. And then also, as Nicole also mentioned, forward is about the length of the stride, that your horse is taking longer strides and really moving through the body. Forward doesn't mean short, quick, choppy strides. So okay, so from a training perspective, when my horse isn't forward, I think a lot of it is how you apply your aids, right? Because if you start nagging and clamping and pushing every stride, your horse gets more and more reliant upon that. So I like to do a lot of transitions, like go, stop, go, stop, go, stop. Of course, that's difficult to do in a show. You can't be like, oh, judge, my horse is behind the leg. I need to do some transitions. So that's where the warm up comes in, is getting your horse really in front of the leg, responsive before you go in the show ring, because when you're in the show ring, it is a performance and you want to make it look easy, even if it's not. And then another part of forward is suppleness. So when we think about the training scale, rhythm and suppleness. So if you're lacking suppleness, that's why your horse slows down in turns, is because they don't want to bend their body. And so they slow down. So suppleness exercises are good for that. So let's see. There's a quick question here from Natalie. How is the training scale masterclass different from strides? So strides is an ongoing program that we have. The training scale masterclass is much more in depth. So in the training scale masterclass, we go through each level of the training scale in extreme detail. I do a live theory lecture. Each level of the training scale has a series of exercises which are specific to that level. And that's what I like, is that the training scale helps you to organize all the exercises that we know, like leg yields, transitions, shoulder in, and helps you understand what exercises help with rhythm and suppleness, what exercises work on connection, so that you have that framework in your mind. So the Train Scale Masterclass is a lot more in depth. It's very much like a college course, in that there's, reading, there's lectures, there's exercises, there's guest speakers. We have everything you could ever dream of wanting to learn, you will learn inside the Training Scale Masterclass. So, okay, next comment from Katie. Needs more bend. What do we do? Okay, so first of all, how do you decide when you write that comment, Nicole? Needs more bend. What do you see?
So I can really see it in circles, but it can happen in corners and things like that. So that might also be where you see that comment. But basically what's happening is, when the horse is on the circle, the horse's body is straight, and as they turn, their quarters swing out. So the front end is on a circle line and the back end is moving outside the circle line. So what that means is we need more bend in the rib cage so that the legs are on the same path. Sometimes we also see it if the horse is crossing behind, because that means that their hind leg is going out. But typically, you can also sometimes see it in the contact, if they get stiff, or if they're tilting their head instead of bending and turning their neck and their body. We can also see it if they're leaning in on the turn. Sometimes we see wheelie turns, especially in the canter with some of the young kids. And I'm like, oh my goodness, as they're wheeling around, they need more bend and balance. That's typically what I see when that's happening there.
Yeah. So from the rider's perspective, when your horse doesn't bend, I think a lot of times we feel them falling in, right? We feel like we can't get them off the inside leg, or that they want to cut the corners, or that they want to slow down, right? That's another thing when they don't bend. And honestly, if I have a horse who's really stiff and who doesn't bend, I almost always fix it from the ground, because I find that that's the best way to help your horse understand how to bend their body on a curved line. It's kind of like physical therapy, and horses are kinked in one direction. So most horses are kinked like a banana to the left. And in order to get them to bend to the right, they have to unkink that left side. And it's a lot easier to do that from the ground when you're not sitting on their back and when they don't have to figure out what to do with the weight of your body on them. So again, all of that's in the Train Scale Masterclass, where I go through, if you're getting this comment, needs more bend, here's how to go back to the beginning and address that. And here's how to teach your horse to bend step by step. And it's always important to be able to break things down for your horses into small steps that they understand. And that's what I love about the training scale, is it gives me a framework to solve my problems. Because I think in the webinar on Sunday, I talked about how we all get frustrated, where you're like, oh, my horse won't bend. My horse won't go forward. I've seen this comment 50 million times. I don't know what to do about it. And so when you feel that frustration, thinking about the training scale, thinking about like, okay, this is the sequence of exercises I need to follow to get more bend or to get more impulsion. I think that's really important. So we should talk about impulsion.
Yeah, building on the because I just had another thought about it as you were talking. I was like, oh yeah, good point. When we say needs more bend, and this is where I think it's really important also to really consider what the judge is saying, because sometimes as we write things, it might be a little ambiguous, because you might have bend in your horse's body when you're doing something. You just need more bend. And I think that sometimes is misconstrued a little bit. Because remember, depending on the curve of your line, whether you're on 20-meter circle, 15-meter circle, or 10-meter circle, your horse will need to be bent more. And so this is when when we're talking about going up the levels, the degree of difficulty and the requirements of each of the training scale elements gets higher and higher and higher as we go up the levels. The amount of bend and balance you need in a 10-meter circle in the trot or even canter is a lot more than a 20-meter circle in trot. And so keep that in mind, that you might have enough bend to do a training level test, but you might not have enough bend and suppleness in your body to do a first or second or higher test. So just something to think about.
And I think that bend, like when we think about why is bend so important and why is that something that the judges look at, I think it's twofold. One is that it allows the horse to use their body more efficiently. So when they're going through a circle and they're correctly bending in their spine on the circle line, it's not so hard on their legs. It's not putting as much torque on, like, especially on that inside front foot. But almost more importantly is that bend allows you to control your horses. And none of us like getting run off with or having a horse that bolts or bucks or rears or does any of those things. And so when you can really get your horse to bend in their body, it does something to them mentally. It helps them mentally to relax and mentally to focus on you. And it allows you to channel their energy. Because horses are flight animals, if we hold them and say, no, you can't go, don't go forward, they build up more and more until they explode. So what's important is that you allow them to have forward, you allow them to have rhythm, right? That's the base of the training scale. You have to let your horse go, but then you have to couple that with bending them in the body and having that suppleness so that you can channel the energy and there's not out of control. So
yeah. Speaking of
judges don't like it. Judges don't like it when the horses are out of control, do they?
No, typically not. No. I guess that begs another question. What do we do, or what do riders do, or what is the protocol when something is spicy or naughty or disobedient? Because Annika is saying the comment, she had a comment, spicy, period, disobedient. So typically when something like that is commented, what's gone wrong, whether it's a buck or a takeoff or a leap. You as the rider are very aware. You don't need us to write what's happened. But when we think about the training scale and how that affects our scores and things like that, depending on what has happened, it's usually a rhythm and suppleness error because it's a submission error that's happened. So when horses are evading like that, it's a lack of suppleness or a lack of rhythm in their body, and they're finding ways to try and get out of it. So if it happens in the ring, you have a couple different options. You can either keep going or, if you're really in a sticky spot, you can stop and ask to retire. What I would suggest, if depending on the show you're at and things like that, is try and get through as much of the test as possible with being safe, and then pull up on the last, before the last center line, because then you've spent your time in the ring schooling your horse and kind of getting into it a little bit and getting the time game and settled. And maybe the next time you can come back and have a better test, but also use your best judgment. And maybe, I don't know, Amelia, would you say that's the right idea from a trainer's point of view? I as a judge, I think it's strategic to have more time in the ring. But what would you say?
Yeah, I think that a couple of things are important. I think it's important that you go into your test with as much good preparation and confidence as you can. So, what I do a lot of times if I have a young horse or a green horse and I'm not sure how they're going to be, is I kind of give myself permission to go to the show. And if it's not a good feeling in the warm up, to just school in the warm up and not have the pressure of going into the show ring. So my horse Luigi, when I got him as a 5-year-old at the first show, I had no idea how he was going to be, and I was feeling under the weather and I was never taking him anywhere. And I was like, I don't know how this is going to go. So, I went the first day and I did all my groundwork and I lunged him and I rode him, and he was a little nervous, but he was pretty good. And then the next day I was like, all right, well, I'm just going to warm him up. And if he's good, I'll go in and ride. If he's super tense and nervous, then you know what? I'm just going to school him, because it's not going to get any better in the show ring. Like, it's definitely not. So give yourself that permission. It's okay to just go and school your horse a few times so you know what they're going to be like at a horse show, and try to set it up for success so you don't end up having a huge like blow up in the ring. That said, we've all had that happen to us in the ring. And there's times where I've made a circle, which the judges will usually give you a -2, like an error for your score. It's not a great thing, but sometimes if you have a horse that like really spooks or really gets scared and you need to make an extra circle, you might need to do that to get control. But how, like from a judge's perspective, if I make an extra circle, how do you see that?
So it depends how and where you've made the extra circle. Typically speaking, most judges would make it as a -2. Some judges, depending on if it was a lack of submission and I made a circle to regain control versus my horse spooked and I circled to get back on the correct line, some judges might do the second one not even as an error. They just might score you low on the actual movement. So it depends a little bit what happens, but we can also tell, like, we can see that if you're having trouble and like if you need to take an extra circle, take an extra circle. Like, stay safe and then keep going. Like, we want you, I think that's the biggest misunderstanding, is that judges want you to do well. We're rooting for you in the booth. We are riders and we have been in your shoes. We've sat through everything. Like, we want you to do well. And if you need an extra circle, do it. Like, stay safe and then keep going.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's also important to remember that it's not always about the score that day. It's about setting your horse up for success in the future, because until you're riding down the center line at the Olympics, which none of us are yet, it's just all about developing a partnership with your horse and developing that connection with your horse. And if you need to make an extra circle to give your horse a little more confidence because they've just gotten really scared, then make another circle and take the -2, because in the scheme of things, it's better for you and your horse to have a positive experience and to stay safe than it is to like force them to do something. So, all right, I would love to know anyone who is riding here, who's watching live, type in the comments. We want to know your horse's age, breed, and temperament, because we love all horses in our sport of dressage. I wanted to talk about halts though, because I feel like halt is something that I get asked all the time. How do you get your horse to halt square? How do you improve your halts? It's the first and the last impression that the judge sees, so it's important to practice them. So what are kind of the biggest things that you see in halts, Nicole?
The biggest struggle I see for riders in the halt is not immobile for 3 seconds. They don't establish the halt. Either the first halt or the second halt or both halts. And sometimes this is simply they're so excited to be done, they drop the reins before they've established it, and then they keep walking on. Sometimes the horse is tense and won't stand. Sometimes it's the rider trying to get them square after they've kind of already stopped. Like they can feel something's a foot is out and they're trying to shuffle it, and then it just kind of collapses. But that's the biggest thing I see is a lack of immobility in the halt.
Yeah. And some of that I think is just the rider remembering to like breathe and count to 3 because it's 3 seconds,
Yeah.
right?
It's 3 seconds, like 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, then you salute. That's also sometimes happens is sometimes people forget to salute, but that one's not as often.
I didn't know you have to count to 3 and then salute. I thought you could just salute and the whole thing could be 3.
I think technically, I've always been taught in all of our clinics that it's 1, 2, 3, then salute because you've established it, then you're salute. Otherwise, it's 2 halves of halt, right? Because think about it. If you're sitting there and you salute and the horse moves in the salute, right? You could theoretically just kick them forward and keep going, right? But if you stand there, halt, count to 3, then go to move, because that's also sometimes what happens is you drop your hand and the horse moves over because they feel a shift.
Yeah.
And if that happens, you could theoretically just keep going, right? From the movement. But then if you saluted in the middle of your halt, then you've lost your 3 seconds.
Yeah.
So
interesting. Well, we're going to have to watch this because I'm going to Aachen next week. I'm super excited. I'm going to be in Germany and they just released today all the riders. So I think Glamourdale's going, Charlotte Dujardin. It's going to be very exciting. And then Nicole, tell us your exciting thing in July.
I am going to the Olympics with my mother. We're going to go to Versailles and watch cross country day and day 1 of dressage. I'm very excited.
So we'll have to watch how all of them do their halt and their salute. But I was going to say, how do you train your halts? So
that's an important part.
I think like if you're struggling with your horse won't stay on the contact, your horse is going crooked. A couple of things. Halt you have to be careful about because if you practice it over and over and over again, it gets worse. So you definitely have to practice it like tactfully with the training scale in mind. So what I do if I'm struggling with my halts is I make it a little easier. I go back and I just do trot, walk, trot on the rail. And I really make sure that my horse stays straight and that they keep the same connection and that the rhythm is clean from walk to trot and back to walk. Then I might do walk, halt, walk on the rail. And then the last thing is I'll put it on the center line. And it's also important to remember that even though you halt at training level and you halt at Grand Prix, the standard is different. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So when we think about going back to the training scale and getting to our Grand Prix horse who has this balance and cadence and lift through their whole body that they can come in from the canter and land so perfectly in balance that they are straight, not crooked, they're on their line, they're balanced, they're square underneath themselves like that. And then you compare that to our training or intro level horse. They get to come in on the trot, they can walk a few steps, and then they can halt and be immobile. Would we like them to be square? Of course. But at intro and training level, because we don't really have connection yet, the 3rd rung of the training scale, it's not really fair to ask those horses to be square. Now, this is where it gets a little funky because as the judge at the end of the arena at C, I can see if you are straight and I can see if you're stepping out or if you're crooked on your line or if the horse's one leg is out, but I can't see if you are straight on your line. I can't see if the hind legs are out or underneath the horse. So it is the role of the side judge to see the balance horizontally as you come into the halt. And typically in our lower levels, we don't have a side judge. And that's also because we don't necessarily need to see if they have that connection yet, because it's not being expected of you in training. And first you are a little bit, but not the same way. So as an intro or training or even first level rider, you can come in. You don't need to necessarily worry if you've got one leg sticking out, as long as it's not out to the side. The judge at the end can't see that. And I think also it's important to remember that when we're thinking about our quality of our halts, not just as Amelia said, it's the criteria and what we expect of them goes up. And you have to think about that in training as well. If you're struggling to trot into the halt, then walk into it, right? And get them comfortable and developed with that. And then work it up progressively. You don't necessarily need to keep spooling the trot, halt, trot, halt, trot, halt if it's going south. Go back and say, okay, can I walk into the halt? And then go from there. Can I keep them straight? Can I keep them balanced? Do they halt immobile for the 3 seconds? And then continue on. But it's, Carl Hester says, you should really think about your center lines and you should really think about your halts because they appear in every single test we do. There's only 2 tests that we don't do 2 centerline halts, and that's 3 actually. I shouldn't say that. There's 3. There's an eventing test where you don't halt when you come in. There's an intro test where you don't halt when you come in, and then there's a 4-year-old test where you don't halt when you come in. And the reason why is because for those horses, the requirements of that test aren't even to have 2 balanced halts because it's so much more elementary. They don't feel like the horse is balanced to do it twice in a test, just do it once at the end. Does that give you a little bit of an idea of what the judge is looking for?
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. And, I think that one theme that I tried to bring out last week in the boot camp and also with all this discussion in the training scale is, like Nicole said, how can we make it simple and how can we break things down in a way that our horse can understand and not expect too much of them? And when we're having a problem, go back to the basics and go back to the training scale or a little bit of a more simple exercise, because horses always want to try for you. They always want to do what you're asking. And so if they're not doing what you're asking, it's because they don't understand it or because physically they're not capable of doing it. And I think that that's one thing that I certainly want in my riding is to train with kindness and compassion and understanding. And the training scale allows you to do that. And also the judges, like the way the tests are designed, they help you train your horse. Like the beginning tests don't even have a halt because your horse isn't ready for that yet. So yeah, important stuff to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Well, I think that is enough for tonight. Thank you so much, Nicole. We do hope that you'll join the Training Scale Masterclass. Enrollment closes Sunday is the last day to sign up. Nicole will be seen in the Training Scale Masterclass. And yeah, it's just a wonderful program. It's definitely my favorite program. I've been redoing all the slides this week and there's so much great content and information that's really going to help you with your horse, regardless of your horse's age or level or whatever comment you're getting from the judges. I think we can help you with it.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah. All righty. Well, thank you, Nicole. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.